freed up to innovate without excessive regulation. Instead, they're subjected to the same regulations as every other public school in the state, and in addition, they're subjected to the compliance requirements of their authorizers, and recent state school code has placed more reporting requirements on these charter schools. Another challenge for charter school people is dealing with public controversy, public misconceptions, and the outright hostility coming from some conventional public school personnel. We are portrayed as piranhas feeding off the lifeblood/dollars that somehow intrinsically belong to public schools. Aiming this hostility at charter school operators is equivalent to shooting the messengers. After all, what are these people really guilty of? I say that their worst sin is that they've taken the opportunity to provide an educational setting based upon their deeply held beliefs. In this respect, how different are they than thousands of other educators in the state of Michigan? Now, I know that Pat Sandler talked to you about some of the myths and criticisms surrounding charter schools 2 weeks ago. Nevertheless, I'd like to use this soapbox, so to speak, to address some of these same issues and also some different issues from the perspective of a charter school operator. One issue that Pat did not address was that of private school conversions. And this is one that's been aimed particularly at New Branches School, because we formerly existed as the climbing tree of private schools. When this issue comes up, charter opponents cry foul. They say this is public funds for private schools. Their position basically comes down to a simplistic premise. Once private, always private. It matters not to these critics that these schools have legally reorganized under new corporate status. It matters not to these critics that these schools have had to open their enrollment without any form of discrimination to every child who wishes to attend them. The bottom line remains, once private, always private. Based upon this simple premise, I'd like to point out to you that Grand Rapids Public Schools has been and is currently operating a private school. Maybe you're not aware, but the Southeast Academic Center has been operated by the public schools here for at least 10 years, been receiving public funds, and they were formerly a Catholic parochial school called Our Lady of Sorrows. I think it's also noteworthy that Grand Rapids Public Schools was totally willing and ready to take the former climbing tree into its fold in 1987. And the only reason that I'm standing here today as a charter school operator is because the Grand Rapids Education Association refused to let Grand Rapids Public Schools grant even the minimal amount of seniority to the teachers that were transferring in to the public school. A case where another example of the inflexibility that goes with some of the public school operations. Another often repeated criticism of charter schools is that they aren't really public schools because they have appointed boards. The underlying logic here seems to be that the only way to be a public school is to be organized exactly like every other public school, organized and governed exactly like any other public school. There's an unwillingness to break the mold. Status quo must prevail. Maybe, just maybe, could we think, that publicly elected school boards are not the best governing method for public schools. Well, think about it. Okay? Ask some retired public school superintendents what they think about working with elected boards. I've talked to quite a few. Biggest frustration of their employment. Ask some, for that matter, let's ask some retired public school board members what they think about it. I noticed Saturday's paper, and I think it's worth a quote from Susan Zimmerman, who's leaving the board. Fortunately, the district functions in spite of the board, And that's not a bad thing, she said. But when you think about what might happen if the board are working together instead of arguing among themselves, who knows what could be done? Now, I'm not saying that one way or the other way is better. Maybe there's some kind of another solution to the situation that involves both appointed and elected board members. Let's look at it. Let's not close our minds to it. I think it's also important to point out that Grand Valley and many other, and some other public universities that receive state funds are operating quite well under appointed boards. The last criticism that I'd like to address, and it's one that Pat Sandro touched on a couple of weeks ago, has to do with skimming the best students and skimming the best parents. That this also promotes sort of a white flight into these charter schools. I think now that there's enough data on the table, including the recently released MEP scores, to dispel most of these myths. Last week, Tom told you about the figures that 51% of the students in charter schools are minority students. It's interesting to note that this is 22% more than the minority enrollment in charter and in all public schools across the state. He mentioned the 49.8% eligible for free lunch. He seemed to discount these figures as being skewed by Detroit and in other schools with Afrocentric curriculums. To bring this issue closer to home for you, I've taken the time to survey the local charter schools. I'd like to offer you some demographic information about these local charter schools. There are 6 in the greater Grand Rapids area. Excel Academy, New School for Creative Learning, West Michigan Academy for Hospitality Sciences, West Michigan Academy for Environmental Sciences, New Branches School, and Horizons Community School. The total number of students in these schools is 860. Of that, 23% of the students are minority students. 20% of them are eligible as being designated low-income students. And 10% of them, and for this number I've taken out the Horizons Community School, which basically all the children in the school are special needs students that have not made it in other school districts. So just 10% in the other schools, 10% of the students are receiving special ed services. I don't think that's skimming. It's important to realize that charter schools are as different from each other as many traditional public schools or conventional public schools are different from each other. That largely the kind of populations we have are dependent upon the geographical area in which we're situated. It doesn't surprise me that West Michigan Academy for Environmental Sciences has the lowest level of minority enrollment. They're on the west side. Doesn't that fit what you know about the west side, folks? I also want to tell you, because I'm from New Branches, I want to give you our specific data. We have 94 students, and 47% of those students are minority students. 25% of those students are low-income students, and 8.5% of our students receive special ed services. There is some validity to the criticism that charter school parents, that charter schools get parents that are more willing to be involved. That situation is nearly identical to the situation in the Grand Rapids magnet schools and magnet schools elsewhere. Thoughtful and involved parents are willing to go shopping, and as a result, their children end up in some of these schools. Frightened parents also go shopping. I'll never forget the inner city mother who, after she found out that her child got into New Branches School as a result of a lottery, cried. And as she cried, she repeated several times, "All I want for my child is a safe school." It's regrettable when thoughtful and involved parents leave a struggling school, thus making it a worse situation. But isn't it also regrettable that up until now, only those families with financial means to do so have been able to send their children to escape these schools send their children to private schools, or move to the suburbs. I'm going to ask my much better half here, my wife Hildi Paulsen, who is the curriculum supervisor at New Branches School, to just give you a quick overview of what our programs are. And then both of us will stand here and take your questions.
One of the, or a couple of the key elements in terms of building our program and making it strong are parent involvement, as Dave just talked about, and also the building of community. We recognize that parents are the primary educators of their children, and we also recognize the critical importance of the homeschool connection. Because of our small size, we're able to develop and maintain a family-like atmosphere with many planned social and educational events and activities for the parents and for the families. Our children are grouped developmentally into 5 multi-age classrooms with a 2 to 3 year age span. Our class sizes range from 17 students to 23 students. There's a teacher assistant assigned to each classroom, and in 2 of our classrooms we have foster grandparents. We also have some Calvin students who, through their service learning center, volunteer on a weekly basis, as well as some parents and even children's grandparents who volunteer in the classrooms. Our staff members focus on building the self-esteem of their students and conflict resolution skills, as well as cooperative learning and the development of problem-solving skills. Our curriculum planning and delivery is centered around thematic instruction. We have 3 year-long school life themes that rotate. This year, our theme is people who have made a difference. Visitors at our school see individualized and small group instruction, as well as total group instruction. And they also see planned cross-age activities, activities where children from different classrooms are working together on projects. Programs that have been adopted for our curriculum include Math Their Way for 5 to 7-year-olds, Everyday Mathematics or Chicago Math for 7.5 to 11-year-olds, Whole Language, the high school curriculum, Spanish language instruction, the Michigan Model for Comprehensive Health Education, and Project Charlie. Other key program elements are multicultural education and anti-bias activities, service learning, using the world as our classroom. Our children take a lot of field trips, and we also bring in a number of resource people. Environmental awareness and stewardship, appreciation for the arts and creativity, and before school care and after school care. Our students are assessed through student portfolios, which are shared with their parents at conference time during student-led conferences. The teachers use diagnostic language and math testing to determine the placement of children. Teacher documentation is used. Expert studies done by the children on a topic they select and present to their class. And the memes, our favorite one. Our total program, we ask our parents to evaluate. So we do have parent evaluations for that too. That concludes my overview. And I guess we're ready for questions.
Terrific. Okay, we're open for questions. Tom, you're on.
The responses that you gave in effect to some of the kinds of things Tom mentioned last time and other people, criticisms, I think we need to make the distinction between criticisms that are aimed at either the concept of charter schools or what we fear some people want to do with them, the hidden agendas part, and evaluation of what specific charter schools are doing. I obviously can't speak for everybody, but I know I certainly have some fears about the hidden agendas of the charter schools, and I fear having them do too many too quickly. But I think the basic concept of having charter schools, if we're looking at it as an experimental approach, a chance to offer some alternatives and learn from that, is good. And I think the people, I would make a real distinction between any criticisms of people trying to do charter schools and criticisms that are really aimed at the broader system issues and the possible intentions of some of the people behind the broader effort to get lots of charter schools. And I hope that most of us here are not being critical of people who are trying to run a charter school, who are trying to do some things. But if we have criticisms, that we're focusing those on these broader questions of what's the broader impact of those policies that are being pursued.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Appreciate you. I do want to say that we've been supportive of the CAP, and we're very supportive of, based upon our experience, we were really promoting that there be a lengthy waiting period, minimum of 6 months, between receiving a charter and opening a charter. And we're very accepting of the idea that charter schools are experimental, and we accept that they should receive adequate, thorough evaluation. In fact, I had an article here by the president of the National Education Coach, Schenken, and one of the points that he made is that how some people think that, some of these schools, just like restaurants or other businesses, they're going to fail, and so what? So many will fail. That's the one. And his point is, look, when these schools fail, children are being failed. And for that reason, I totally support his position on it. These schools need adequate evaluation assessment.
Nancy, you had your hand.
Yeah, how do we evaluate whether the separation of church and state is, in fact, being respected? Once we've given a charter, which parts of the evaluation that the state does are going to look at that? Because I think that's what people are concerned about. And I think there could be a question, especially about schools that have been taken over and were previously. For example, Our Lady of Sorrows. What do we know? Is the kind of curriculum the same as it was before? Are the textbooks, because we know that there are textbooks that have a slant, and there are ways of teaching without a textbook that have a slant. I hear about the discussions that are held in parochial schools about abortion, about whatever else. Obviously, you can do it a lot of different ways, and when the door is closed, what are the teachers doing? How do we find that out? Not on a meat test.
Let's remember that.
And I respect the fact that you're probably doing it fine. We're not asking about you. But what about, and I don't know specifically which one of these schools has been taken over as having a point of view. I guess the question here is toleration, open-mindedness. How do we assure any of this by the state evaluation process that we currently have or that is being implemented?
Well, people should know that the recent revision of the school code required that the Michigan Department of Education directly assess and evaluate these schools, so that now we're not only being assessed and evaluated by our authorizing agent in the normal assessment evaluation on Public Act 35 and 365, school improvement and all that business, but we're also going to be evaluated directly by the Michigan Department of Education. How else do you know? I think, first of all, I think it's important to realize that this line between church and state is not only being pushed within the charter schools, some charter schools.
Right.
I think we're well aware that it's being pushed elsewhere,
Right.
maybe even in this community, or not too far away, and then in other states, which we've heard about recently. So that's not an issue that just applies to the charter schools. And I think we have to rely on our media, and we have to rely on informed public citizens to bring it to the front when this sort of abuse occurs. And I think also that the people in charter school movement have to do some self-policing, and I intend to be part of that.
Thank you.
Rear row.
Yes, were you involved with the Pine Tree School before it became branches?
Yes, as was announced here, I was one of the founding people involved in that school, and I retired from it before, thought I was out of education for the rest of my life before I got back into this as a charter school operator. No intention of being here today. I left and I thought I was happily out of it, and somehow got enthused about the charter school movement, and here I am.
I was
about security. Do you have to, is there rules that you have to have somebody around like they do in the larger schools? I know, or you do your own police work, or more to say, or?
Well, we don't have any security personnel in the school. We do have policy.
What grades do you have? 1 to 12 or 6 to 12?
Equivalent K-6. We're an ungraded program. Many of the children couldn't tell you what grade they're in. We often have to figure out what grade they're in order to report to the state. But
you're almost a special ed school?
No, we're not special.
I don't, that's right. That takes rules that I don't really know.
Kindergarten through 6.
Kindergarten?
Equivalent to kindergarten for 6 and 8.
That's what it is.
But we have it's interesting to note, when I started out teaching some 20-some years ago, and I was assigned to Hall School, one of the things they were promoting that year was continuous progress programs, which meant that students would move continuously through the curriculum without regard to grades. And that failed after about a year because nobody could stop talking grades and nobody could pull it off.
Then you're concentrating on the individual then in your situation.
The individual and the family, and accepting what the children come with, what they bring to school.
Yes, sir. Prepare the children to move from your school into another system. If they're ungraded and you have a hard time figuring out what grade they're in, well, when they leave your school, they have to go somewhere else. How do you prepare them to do that?
Well, basically, the receiving school will look at their chronological birth date. And that's pretty much how it's done in most schools. And if they are, 11 by a certain date, then they go into this grade, and 12 and so forth. Our teachers of the older children in the spring of their last year will do also, because we don't use grades like A, B, C, but they will do some work with the children and explaining when they leave. They're going to be most likely going into a situation where they will have A's, B's, and C's, so they will do some work that is graded that way. That's basically, I guess, how it works. Because it's looked at totally chronologically, with input, I guess, from us, especially regarding some children who have been receiving special services. The children have portfolios, right, that follow them.
But they're the child, and does you determine where it should be in the system?
Hopefully they will, right, but the primary benchmark, I guess, is chronological age, usually.
We often have to intercede and try to advocate for a child that needs an advanced placement.
Or a placement below, I guess, too, either way.
Hildi, what is your enrollment this year compared to last year? What is the number one reason that you would give that people would send their children to your school? And then as a final, what was your tuition prior to?
Okay. 72 last year. At 72 last year, the increase this year is primarily due to having a free school classroom last year, which we did not have this year. And what was the other part? Oh, why would people choose our school?
Yeah, what is the number one reason that you would give that they would come to your school?
Well, boy, I don't know if there is a number one. I suppose parents feeling like the existing school or the current school does not meet the needs of their child for whatever reason. We tend to have children who are at this end or that end. We've had children in our school who are very capable, highly capable children who have been asked or almost forced to, well, you're in the 3rd grade, so you're going to have to do the 3rd grade work, even though that child is helping his 4th grade neighbor with her homework after school. And so that parent was very frustrated. We've had other students who are just totally lost in their classroom, and so parents will choose something different, more individualized attention perhaps. And then you had a question about,
last year.
2 years ago, probably under $3,000, $2,700 perhaps.
Okay, Tom.
The first year that you were funded, your funding went up 100 sent from new branches to the school that you now, from Climbing Tree to New Branches. In that first year that you were a charter school, what percentage of the students were students that were in New Branches, Climbing Tree prior to New Branches?
53%.
So you see, that's the argument that's being raised by Dan DeGrow and other critics, which has just now come up, and they've arbitrarily drawn the line that if you were 40% of your previous composition of students, then you're simply a conversion. And that's going to be very difficult to answer if they hold a line at 40% and you were at over 50. So it does express some concern. And I am an advocate for the private school and the religious school. I think the charter school challenges the existence of the purely private school and the parochial school in a very strange way, because a good percentage of the students transferring over are coming from former private schools and parochial schools into the charters, which is putting huge pressures on the small schools that don't want any government regulation, wouldn't care to operate the way you have apparently agreed to operate under the new regulations, and would continue to be purely individualistic, parent-driven, and a curriculum that would do whatever it wants to do and comply by the broadest form to whatever the state requires. Have you a response to that?
But it's my world, it's my home, not always right, but not all wrong, I love it, so I'm gonna stay better, make it better, every day.
Advocate for the private school and the religious school. I think the charter school challenges the existence of the purely private school and the parochial school in a very strange way, because a good percentage of the students transferring over are coming from former private schools and parochial schools into the charters, which is putting huge pressures on the small schools that don't want any government regulation, wouldn't care to operate the way you have apparently agreed to operate under the new regulations, and would continue to be purely individualistic, parent-driven, and a curriculum that would do whatever it wants to do and comply by the broadest form to whatever the state requires. Have you a response to that?
I'd like to address what you said about the 50% rule. I think that the number of students that in our first year of operation as a charter school, 53% of the students came from the existing climbing tree school. And I think that was an advantage that they had due to proximity. They were there, they knew what was going on, they knew when it was going to happen. It was also a factor of how charter schools were set up that first year and how quickly they had to form and open their doors. So there was very little time for the amount of public service announcements and things that should have been done. There wasn't time for it, and frankly, it was during a time when people were on vacation. A lot of people didn't even know that, and I think that's regrettable. I think that should be fixed in the future. I think there ought to be a well-defined advertisement plan, public announcement plan, so that everybody has equal access to it.
I think there is in our contract.
Well, the new contract does have a more defined situation. So I think that should be fixed, and I agree. And to some degree, our situation abused and gave a preference to our existing students, not because we designed it that way, but it happened that way. Okay. Currently, we only have of our 95 or 94 students, we only have, I think, 35 of them that have any connection to the previous climbing tree schools 2 years later. So that over time, it'll be totally open to anyone that wants to be in the school.
I think the argument should have been, were you in existence before as a private or parochial school? Did you have an existence before you became a charter? If a charter came out of nowhere, then it would be clear that it was created under the rules of charters. But when you have a large number of conversions, and there have been, and then to somehow set an arbitrary number and say, well, because you're only half or you're only 40% of what you used to be, you are not a conversion, it seems to me that it would have been a lot easier had the rules just allowed for people to start completely over. And they could have drawn from a number of private schools, or one particular private school, but that school would have gone out of existence, might have had a new name, a new location, or at least some disconnect with its prior past.
Well, exactly what we did. We formed a new corporation, teaching staff. We ended up
with Hildi at Blue Branches. I think the question that Tom is raising, so forth, I believe in choice.
Jeff has spent his professional career in education, beginning as a teacher in New Jersey 29 years ago. Under Jeff's leadership, the school district has made many changes in its operation, including the development and implementation of a community-developed, student-centered strategic plan, as well as requiring student learning plans, a student service component for all students, and mastery of curriculum as a means of measuring results. While the district has experienced steady improvement in state test scores in reading and math since 1991, this year, the district has seen achievement increase to its highest level ever. In 1994, Mr. Grotsky called for a children's summit in Grand Rapids, which brought the community together on behalf of children. Over 1,000 people gathered to begin task forces which spearheaded initiatives that will impact the lives of children. Summit 95 was equally successful, with additional commitments for services and programs that directly impact the educational lives of children and their families. We welcome Jeff this morning to our continuing forum series on public education. Jeff is going to discuss with us public education in Grand Rapids, so let's welcome him. Grotsky.
Not to have a podium because I want to feel like I'm part of you rather than having some kind of a shield, although sometimes that shield might not be a bad idea. Well, I first of all want to thank you so much for inviting me. You've had a wonderful lineup of persons, and I thought I would be fourth and be the cleanup hitter, but you've got some other folks that are going to follow, and I trust that you've had some wonderful discussions with them. What I'd like to do is talk a bit about our school system, and I'm going to ask Alan to be my timekeeper if he has a watch, or somebody else, because frankly I could stand up here for an hour or two and talk about the wonderful school system here in the city of Grand Rapids. And I just kind of get carried away, and I know that when I'm sitting out there and there's a speaker, so many times I'm thinking, why doesn't he talk about what I want him to talk about? So I'm not going to talk a little bit about what I want to talk about, and then we'll have a lot of questions and answers and get to what you want to hear about. So I hope there's a good mixture there. Grand Rapids Public Schools is the second largest school district in the state of Michigan. We have programs for 26,000 students pre-kindergarten through second grade, and we also have a program for adults. And as a matter of fact, the last time I was in this wonderful chapel, we had a graduation program for students who are in our alternative education program, Westbridge, kids who just don't do well in a regular school environment. And I tell you, I get choked up when I go to those graduations and hear the stories of these young people who have failed throughout their life in regular educational programs, and through an alternative program are able to get their high school diploma. And then next door in your beautiful sanctuary, we've had adult education programs, and we graduate over 100 adults, excuse me, students who range anywhere from 20 years old to, believe it or not, 83. I got the chance 2 years ago to hug one of our graduates who was 83 years old and was studying out of, I think it was a Clark retirement home. But the stories of those students, and I wonder, aside, why we are going to be forced out of the adult education business. But that's something else we can talk about. But we do provide programs for about 4,000 adults as well, students who are over 20 years old. We are probably the largest employer in the city of Grand Rapids with well over 4,000 employees. We serve 20,000 meals a day, so we're in the food service business. And for all of you folks that get stuck behind those, what I call yellow limousines with the red flashing lights, we transport about 18,000 students a day across the city. And we do look at transportation as part of our education program, opportunities for students to be educated within their neighborhood, within their attendance area, and also across the city. One day, I'll have to tell you this story. I was out at the, I have a board member here, so don't listen to this. I was out at the mall. I think I had to go get a driver's license renewed or something, but I went out to the mall and I saw this Grand Rapids public school bus at the Woodland Mall. I went, oh my goodness. So I wrote the number down. I said, I caught somebody. And went back and I called our transportation guru and I said, what was bus 964 doing out at the Woodland Mall? I thought the bus driver was doing the same thing I was doing, but maybe shopping instead of getting a license. I came to find out, because I don't know everything that goes on in the school district, that we have a program at the mall for our students, which is an internship and a work program for our students in cooperation with the mall. And so after he told me that, I said, thank you. And I felt like a fool because I should have known. I don't check on people, but I just couldn't believe that the bus was stuck there. But anyway, we have programs for every kind of kid in this school system. Kids who are severely involved, kids who are in our school system, and who we provide programs for on a county-wide basis. Kids who are in our school program who are non-ambulatory, kids who are fed through feeding tubes, all the way up to the most bright and gifted students in all of this country. So it is a blessing, really, to be part of this school system and to be able to see how good we really are and what we can provide for children. This is a great school system, folks, and we need all of us. If you either work in the city or you work in the metropolitan area, or if you live in the metropolitan area or in the city, all of us have a responsibility to keep this district strong. Because if this school district goes down the tubes, guess what? The city and the metropolitan area is going to follow it. I've studied urban education, I've studied cities, and the school system, if it's strong and vital, will keep the community strong and vital. So if you're not involved with the schools, and I know Fountain Street Church, and I'm proud of the fact to be here today because you are working with Oakdale, if you're not involved with schools in Grand Rapids in some way, please get involved. And if you can't get to Grand Rapids, get involved in another school district. Every school district needs the support of their community. And I know my would appreciate the fact if you would jingle and get into their schools as well. We're a school district that is improving. And we're different than other urban school districts. So if you want to paint us with the same brush as, I'll talk about schools far away from here, Trenton, New Jersey, or Camden, New Jersey, or East St. Louis, Illinois, we are different. We are a school system that works, and frankly, I think we're one of the premier urban education systems in this country. Nobody is doing what we're doing. And the reason we're doing it is because we have the support of this community. We have a faculty that cares and works hard on behalf of kids and folks who are committed to the education of all children. And I'm proud to be part of that system. We started in 1991 to develop a community-centered strategic plan. No big deal. A lot of people do plans, and a lot of educators, by the way, are wonderful planners. But one of the problems that we have in education is that we're great planners and we're poor implementers. And that's been my part of what I have worried about. But when I came here, one of the things, and the only agenda I had, other than the fact that I wanted our school district to improve, was that I thought we had to have a direction, and we had to have a way to improve the school system. And I thought a strategic plan would work, different than a long-range plan, but would force us to think strategically, to take control of our future as a school system, and move us to another era of education and quality in this great city. So in 1991, 27 persons representing a cross-section of the community came together and developed, I think, the most comprehensive strategic plan that I have ever seen, and consultants who come and work with us have ever seen as well. We went from a steering committee to action teams, 10 action teams that developed implementation plans around those 10 strategies. And the reason, I'm not going to get into all of it, but it developed a mission for us. It developed a set of beliefs and a set of objectives and a way to get there. I believed back then, and this maybe is not the place to say this, I'm not a prophet, I'm not a forecaster, but I really believe that if we would stick to our guns and we would do what we said we would do as a community, that we would fundamentally change the way we operate as a school system and we would improve. And lo and behold, in 1995, just four short years later, and in the scheme of things in education, 4 years is not very much, although we're all impatient when it comes to working with our most precious commodity that we have, our children. We have made the kinds of improvements, and we will continue to make those kinds of improvements because we have not detoured. We haven't moved off of the mark, and we have a plan that's working. It's been reviewed and has been reapproved and readopted by the Board of Education just this last year. I want to talk about 5 areas of that plan, and Alan just kicked me when it's time. We had about 75 programs going on in the school district. We looked at target schools, our inner city schools, the most needy of our schools, and we found that mobility was a big problem. I don't know, I taught many years ago, and one of the things that used to make me crazy was when I got a new kid in my classroom. How many are teachers here? Any? Yeah, how about that? You know? God, I'm preaching to the choir. How many remember when you got a new kid in your class? Oh my goodness! What, you know, where's this kid going to fit in? What reading group? Will he make friends? Will the other kids beat him up? And that used to make me nuts. And when you got 2, it was like, oh my goodness, I need a raise. I need a sabbatical or whatever it was. Think about this. We have schools in our district, schools in our school district, where we get a turnover of 66% of the kids. 66%. Okay, so for every 3 kids you have, 2 of them are going to leave and be replaced by 2. How can you teach? How can kids learn? So one of the things we did is we said, you know, there's only one way to solve that problem, is we can't change housing patterns and so forth. Let's transport the kids back to their school, because we found that they were on a little circuit in the inner city, that they were just moving from one house to another, to another, to another. So what we did is we did something that was very simple, and we said that if you start at Henry Elementary School or if you start at Oakdale Elementary School, guess what? You get to go back to that school for that year and for as long as you want to build stability. So we started to target some of the problems. We knew what they were, and we knew that we could solve them, but we had to get off of our rumps and do something about it. Quickly, the 5 focus areas. All of these programs were going on, and our staff was saying, there's so much going on in this district. We need to get focused. We need to figure out what's important. Help us figure out what's important. And we'll do that. And the other stuff will get done, but we need to focus. So we came up with a brilliant term, focus, 5 focus areas. 5 areas in the district that we believe are critical to the success of the school system. First, mastery. Mastery of curriculum. And the board is going to take action in the next month to implement this on a district-wide basis. If you believe in your heart that all kids can learn, that all children can succeed, then mastery is an approach. Because what it says is that if you don't get it the first time, we teach it. If you don't get it the first time, we'll reteach it. If you don't get it the second time, we'll bring in somebody else to help, because maybe I'm not getting through to you and you need different materials. No child fails in a mastery program. The problem that I think we face today is that we teach, we test, and then we go on. I mean, how unfair is that? What if you don't get it? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. You know, if somebody said to you, we'll teach you how to drive, I want to ask how many failed their first driver's test. And if, God forbid, we let you go out and drive anyway because you failed it. I mean, what we're saying is, even though you don't know how to drive, we're going to let you go out and drive. What we're saying is there are ways, we call them through assistance components, to continue to work with children before school, after school, during the summer, where summer becomes a program not of remediation, but a way for kids to continue on a successful track. So we're going to implement mastery. We have it in 25 schools now, and the data's clear, it works. Second is student learning plans. We all learn in different ways at different rates, but yet everything is boxed. Everybody has to do everything at the same time in the same way. We, as part of our plan, said that we're going to empower children and their parents to take control of their education. And so we have now developed student learning plans. We had them in 27 sites last year with 60 folks working on it. And we're going to begin next year at elementary level, where every child and every parent will have an opportunity to talk about what it is they want to learn. Not that they won't get their core curriculum, but what are things they want to learn? How do they learn best? And what are some goals and objectives that they have for the year? And this will fundamentally change the way we provide education. Something used to make me crazy when I was a parent. You would take your child, you'd go with your child after 10 weeks to a conference, and then all of a sudden the teacher would say, well, your kid's not doing so well. We've got some problems here. And I would say, well, you know, if you just would think about this, I know how my child learns. Why did it take 10 weeks for us to get together? I would like to see student learning plans become the first conference at the beginning of the school year. Think about how wonderful it would be to sit down with your teacher and your child and talk about what you're going to do that year, and for the teacher to become familiar with your child at the front end rather than having to wait 10 weeks. So we're doing student learning plans. We're the first, one of the first in the country. We're the first in the state to really launch a student learning plan program. It can work for everybody, but we're going to do it here in Grand Rapids. Diversity. And we believe that a focus area in our district is diversity. We need to understand it, we need to celebrate it, and we need to make it part of the everyday life of our school system. And we have a major program underway called the World of Difference, which is a program that was developed by the Anti-Defamation League. And we are running that program across the city right now. We've got about 400 persons trained. And Should we have done it 5 years ago? Sure, we should have. Should we have done it a year ago? Yes. But you know what? We're doing it. And we're the only district in the area that's made a commitment into diversity training at that level. And we will move it across the system. The other is quality. We are a quality organization. We don't talk it, but we practice it. 2,000 of our employees have been trained in a program called Leadership Through Quality. It's Xerox's program that they use to turn their company around. We got free training, 2,000 of our employees, and we have 25 of our own employees now who are certified Xerox trainers. So not only are we in the midst of training our own folks, but we're doing some entrepreneurial activities as well, and we're training other school districts with our trainers, making money and putting it back into our own training program. We have fundamentally changed the way we operate as a system. We use framework design teams, we use cross-functional teaming, we value everyone's opinion and give everybody an opportunity to participate in making decisions around the school system. Everybody in our system is valued as a contributing member. It doesn't matter whether you're a bus driver or whether you're a superintendent, you get an opportunity to be at the table and help make decisions about how our system will run. Well, I'm seeing Alan get nervous over here, so I think my time is up. See what I mean? I could talk forever on our school system. So
okay. Let's start with questions.
Meet early in a school year in order to create a teaching plan. It's a wonderful idea. But when I look at some of the classrooms my kids were in, like Riverside Middle or at Creston, the teacher would have 35 or more students in one classroom. If they have 5 times a day that many students coming through, I don't understand how the teachers can handle the load of doing that. That seems unrealistic.
Well, it works. The problem is that in secondary it is much more of a difficult task, and that's why we're starting at the elementary. We're looking at doing it in a student, and the other thing that we're doing at the middle and high school level is what we call student-led conferences, where the student actually takes control of the conference. They're doing it in East Grand Rapids, and we're doing it in some of our schools this year. I think City is using it, where the student actually, it's their conference. And what they do is they put together with perhaps their homeroom teacher what it is that they want to do. See, it's not individual in relationship to each subject area, but it's global goals and objectives or projects that they might want to accomplish. So they would probably be doing it with their homeroom teacher. So we are looking for ways of doing it with them. And I don't have all the answers because we're still piloting it across the middle and high school, the middle and high schools in our district. I can be much more specific on the elementary level because we are ready to launch it because it has been very, very successful. Now, I don't know how they do it in East, but we're looking at, I mean, it's hard. We've got five middle schools, and we have 4 comprehensive high schools, City High School, Park. We have a whole bunch of schools, and it's very, very difficult to figure out exactly how to do it, so we are working through that. But it's right for kids, it works, and we're going to figure out a way to do it. One of the things in our strategic plan, I have to mention this, one of the belief statements is, and I don't have it memorized, but I do have it in my pocket, but basically what he says is that a community, I better read it, because it's really, I think it's one of the most powerful statements that I've ever heard. Here it is here. It says, we believe people working together toward a common goal can achieve anything. And you know that it is a can-do attitude in our district. People said you can't do student learning plans, you can't do mastery. You can't have a Montessori high school, you can't have a Montessori middle school. You know what? We can do anything we really want to with the support of the community, and we're showing. You can't raise MEP scores. You know, the urban districts are going down, not going up. We can do it, and it's because of belief statements like that it works. Let me just give you one quick example, and let me just say this, because now this is not me, okay? But if you ever got a D in algebra, now I didn't, I don't know what I got, but, and this gentleman from my old town better not check on my high school transcript. But you know, if you got a D in algebra, that meant that you learned about 60% of the material, right? But guess what we did? We let you go to geometry, which is predicated on how much you knew in algebra. Now, why would we think that you'll do better in geometry than 60%? You'll probably do worse. It's crazy. It makes no sense. That's what we're trying to correct. Unless you know at least 80% of the material, you can't be successful. If you can't read to a certain level in first grade, why do we move you to second grade? You see, we start a downward spiral of failure, and we wonder why in fourth grade some of our kids psychologically drop out of school. You know why they do? I'll tell you why, because it's not fun failing. It's not fun struggling. I'm a lousy tennis player, but I was smart enough to quit because it wasn't fun getting pounded every week. So I ran, because now I just compete with myself. But that's the situation we put kids in. But when you move on, when you've mastered and you are successful and you go on to the next grade, you know, it's fun being loved by your parent because you've done, for one thing, done great in school. You've made them happy. And I believe that all kids want to make their parents happy. And so we need to give them that opportunity to do that.